good raise. It was kind of like a promotion. And I didn't really notice anything different afterwards. I was bummed. But that's what it's like. That's that principle. We get a raise, we just spend more. Build a business. This is, I think, going to verse 12. When you build a business, now you have overhead and you have employees. You have obligations to take care of, right? There's some business owners here. You know that when you have a business, there's a little extra weight on you. There's obligations. The number that would finally make you feel secure keeps moving. As I kind of saying before, that number that you always need, oh, if I make this much, or if I had this much, I'll be great. Well, it just keeps going up the road. 3,000 years ago, Solomon named the treadmill that we're still running. This is like a treadmill. So let's go to experiment 8. Now, you younger people in the audience, you're probably not thinking this yet. But when you get gray like me, you'll be thinking this. Aging, mortality. Solomon turns to the young ones and says, remember your Creator before the dark days come. Then he paints this picture, the darkening sun, the grinders ceasing. That's like my grinders, my teeth, they fall off, they wear down. I no longer have any teeth. I'm getting that. I got receded gum lines. I'm seeing that. And then the golden bowl broken. It says like the lamp, the light going dim and going out. So every life under the sun ends the same way. Not with a conclusion, but with a funeral. That's the downside. That's the depressing part. And yet we have one more experiment, the last one, experiment 9. Bear with me here. Keep with me. I think we can all relate to this one. Experiment 9 is time in the cycles of life. So I'm going to read through this one. I want us to read through this one because this I think we can relate to this one. So let's go. Next slide here, John. Let's go to read through these. So the teacher says, for everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to harvest, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to tear down, a time to build up, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to turn away, a time to search and a time to quit searching, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be quiet and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What do people really get for all their hard work? I have seen the burden God has placed on us all. So those verses there were a fair amount, but I think we can relate to that time, right? Everything has its season, as we just read. Birth, death, planting, mourning, war, peace. It feels like that wheel that keeps turning, right? The wheel's turning and it's going nowhere. Just a big, vicious cycle, big circle. And if we think about this honestly, I want you to think about this honestly, church. When someone we love, this is hard. It's happened to me. When someone we love dies, what happens? When someone we love dies, we grieve. We grieve. We mourn. And we actually stop. We stop. However, but the world doesn't. The world doesn't stop and mourn and grieve. The traffic still moves. Business is still open. The news cycle moves on. Someone else is born the same day someone who we love is buried. The wheel doesn't pause. And Solomon is saying, if this wheel is all there is, then what did your life actually change? Think about that question. The season went, the season came, the season went, and the wheel just keeps on spinning, keeps on turning. So let's stop for a minute here. That picture of the wheel, the time. The teacher has systematically worked through every candidate answer to the question that we open with. Remember the question? Let's go to the question here. Just refresh our memory. What does man gain under the sun? Solomon has been like a persecuting attorney. He's like an attorney, and he's methodically presenting experiment after experiment. He's trying to answer the question. He goes through the experiments. Why don't you display them up there? He goes through wisdom. He goes through pleasure. He goes through achievement. He goes through wealth, labor, justice, time, and aging. Everyone fails the test. Vapor, breath, mist, temporary, ungraspable. Unable to satisfy the deepest longings of the human heart. Solomon wasn't cynical, though. Keep that in mind. He wasn't a depressed man. He wasn't cynical. He was the most qualified man who ever lived to run this experiment. This maximum wisdom, this maximum wealth, this maximum achievement, and he still came up empty. He had all this stuff, and he came up empty. That's the point. He couldn't find ultimate meaning under the sun. And you know what, church? Neither can we. Neither can we. But then, right there, after all of this, Solomon says something that stops everything. Solomon puts something in this book that's like, boom, halt. It's what I call the pivot. He pivots here in chapter 3, verse 11. Let's look at it. What does it say? Yep, yet God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He has planted eternity in the human heart. But even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. So think about this. This is kind of like that diagnostic key. We ache for permanence, right? We ache for eternity. We ache for that permanence because we were made for it. God made us that way. He put that into our heart. There is something more than what is here. Yet nothing under the sun delivers it, right? Nothing under the sun satisfies that. Solomon couldn't find it under the sun. He was right. It isn't there. But notice what he does as he closes the book. So this is in the middle. This is chapter 3. Then at the close of the book, let's look at chapter 12, verses 13 through 14. What does he say here? Here now is my final conclusion. Fear God and obey his commands, for this is everyone's duty. Verse 14, God will judge us for everything we do, including every secret thing, whether good or bad. So, as we think about this, Solomon ends not with under the sun here in chapter 12. This is the very end of chapter 12. He's not ending with under the sun. He's pointing. He's pointing beyond the sun. He can't see it all super clear like we can. He only had so much revelation at that time. But he knew, and he's pointing to beyond the sun. He's standing at the edge of what God revealed in his day. The promise is real, but it hasn't fully unfolded yet for Solomon. He feels the ache. He's pointing to God. He says, fear God. He's pointing to him, but he doesn't have that full revelation like we do. But he has enough because he knows. So this kind of is my next movement in the sermon is 3, the promise unfolded. That's where our series title comes in. You remember Pastor Allen mentioned this promise back in January. I don't know if anybody remembers that promise back in January, where he started this whole Old Testament thing. He went to the promise of the series, one story of Scripture. You guys remember what that promise was? I'll give you a little hint. It's in the New Testament. It's in Acts chapter 26. This is centuries after Solomon wrote his words. So again, for the background, we're going to go there. Paul is before King Agrippa. Remember? He's on trial. Paul is on trial. He's before the King Agrippa. And he says this, now I am on trial because of my hope in the fulfillment of what? God's promise. Yeah, God's promise made to who? Our ancestors. Some translations, like I think East will say, fathers. So God made a promise to our fathers. What's the next slide? Yeah. In fact, Paul says, this is why the 12 tribes of Israel zealously worship God night and day. So I'm hoping you guys are thinking what this promise is. That's what I was thinking. I'm like, wow, this promise that Paul is talking about to King Agrippa, that the ancestors and everybody knew about, and they share the same hope I have, yet, your majesty, they accuse me for having the same hope. So Paul is on trial for having the same hope that the whole Jewish ancestry had. What is that promise? And then his next verse here, Paul, he asks the most important question. Why does it seem incredible to any of you that God can raise the dead? Boom. God can raise the dead. So Paul isn't pointing to something new here. This is not a new revelation here. That's what I'm trying to get. This was like, to me, what's exciting. This is not brand new here. That what he's talking about, the ancestors knew. He's been pointing to what Israel had been worshiping toward centuries. The promise made to his fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob. God is faithful beyond death. That, I don't know about you folks, that's good news. Because we're all going to die. So we need something, and that is wonderful news. Do you remember when God spoke to Moses at the burning bush? Exodus 3. What did he say? He said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Did you notice he uses present tense? This is at Moses. They're dead.